Hi, I'm Andy Jones. I'm here with Kevin Woolrich, and we're just going to talk about some of the old days at the Hall. Everyone just loves to have me talk about the old days, so here you are. At the top of the stairs now, looking at the posters on the walls, of course, and just looking at the Adam Station, based on Haldor Laxness' book, and which was adapted by Agnes Walsh and Stan Dragland. And Charlie Tomlinson directed it, and that was a great show. And I got to work with Geraldine Hollett and a bunch of incredible people in St. John's. That was great. That was 2004, and that was a great, wonderful, very interesting show. And then right here, this was a great show by Theodore Smith Gilmore. It was called Chekhov Longs, and they did Chekhov shorts first, and they did Chekhov Longs. And they're just a wonderful, wonderful company from Toronto that were really influential in my career, I guess. I saw them in 1984 first, two clowns, Mimi Smith and Dean Gilmore. And it was a wonderful, incredible, interesting show. Then, of course, the Swinton Massacre, I got to be in that too, which was great, which was Ray Guy's, part of Ray Guy's trilogy of plays that he wrote after he wrote A Young Triffy's Been Made Away With. And that was a very funny and interesting and bizarre show, of course, with Ray Guy. Three Dogs Barking, which of course was Frank Barry's wonderful, fabulous murder mystery story that he wrote, which I really loved. High Steel, of course, was a classic Newfoundland show, has now become. And then I got to do lots of other shows. Then just 3 years ago, 2018, that's actually 8 years ago now, I got to do Men of Misfortune with Greg Malone, my old friend. Me and Greg were working on stage. We met in 1954 when we were in grade 1 at St. Bon's, and we kind of worked together off and on all our lives. And we got to do this incredible two-man show by Charles Pico, which really was just a gift in my later life to get that job. And then this is my second kind of major one-man show, which is called Still Alive, and I got to do that at the Hall. And I started in Toronto. I was in Toronto at the time, and I got the National Arts Centre sort of commissioned me to write a show. Actually, it was sort of given to me by Rick Mercer, because he had been offered a role, a slot there. And of course, Rick was on his way up. He couldn't do it. So he offered me, and he asked them to ask me instead. So I got to do that show in 1994. I was living in Toronto. And then then Lois Brown picked it up after that National Arts Centre production and brought it back to the Hall. That was great, great fun. I had lots of fun with that. Then the Drowning Girls, of course, which was Charlie Tomlinson's play, which he wrote with Beth Graham and Daniela Vlaslavic, and they have this show is still on the stage across the world. They just had a big production in Turkey last year, and so it's just one of those shows that's just going all around the world all the time, which has been very successful. There's the Sheila's Brush stuff, that early stuff that was done by Sheila's Brush, the Magnafoot Mountain. Right after we took over the Hall in 1979, Sheila's Brush did a bunch of plays based on Newfoundland folk tales here. And then another Frank Barry's piece, The Strange Case of Madame D, which was a great show. And then, of course, there's Penning the Carol, which is Aidan Flynn's piece, which is on every Christmas, which is a staple of Newfoundland theatre these days. Some Slick, another mummer show about the oil industry. Dancing with Rage, Mary Walsh's show. I got to work with Mary in one of the iterations of that show. And Bugs, 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 which was also by Frank Barry, which was a really wonderful children's show. Wish they would do that again. And of course, Jody Richardson was absolutely brilliant in that, as he is in everything. And this is Rick's show that he did before. I guess he gave me the show. I've killed before and I'll kill again. Then his next show, he gave the spot to me. And there was West Moon, which was done at the Hall, Al Pittman's script, and I remember they were very mad at us at the hall. We were very, very, very disorganized. And I remember there were drunk people in the audience yelling stuff at them, and it was a bit of a disaster, but I think the show went very well, and in the end they forgave the hall. But things were not like they are today. You know, this well-organized, well-oiled machine that the hall is now. It was pretty dodgy in those days, but we were struggling. And Stars in the Sky Morning, again, what a wonderful, wonderful show with Rhonda Payne, Jane Dingle, and Jan Henderson created that show, and that's one of the really classic Newfoundland piece, which I really love. And oh, that's the exit sign. Okay, sorry. And The Best Man, Greg Toomey's play with Greg Hennessy and Maisie Riley, who unfortunately has moved to Halifax, and we kind of lost her as an actor in St. John's. She's a wonderful, wonderful actor. And then we had a show at Holy Heart that, I don't know if they did it at the hall or not, but it was called Suits Do Codco, and they had executives from various companies doing sketches of Codco, which was very interesting, actually. For example, who was I just looking for there? Kathy Dunderdale was in that show, and Kathy was the former premier of Newfoundland, and she turned out to be quite a good comedian, actually. She definitely could have had another career if she had chosen that. Terras de Bacalao, which was the Land of the Codfish, which was a collective play done just after, it was done in 1980, actually, just that year after we took over the hall. That break that happened in the community here, and a second group kind of got their way into the hall and took it over, and I always call it the course correction of the hall. It went a little more democratic than it had been, and anyway, that was one of the first shows, and it was very important that this show be a success, and it was a wonderful, very, very funny show with a great cast of all young, then very young actors. Mary Walsh directed it, and it was a brilliant show. Then there was Habib's Unforgettable All-Night House Party, and I got to play, basically Janet Michael's grandfather in this piece, in this fictional piece, but based somewhat on Janet's own life as part of the Lebanese community in St. John's. So it was a fascinating show. Then I also had the great privilege of working with Johnny Harris, the incredible Johnny Harris, comedian, in Out of the Bog, which is like, I basically got to watch Johnny work. I didn't really have much to do with it. He was so brilliant, and that was such a funny show, and I've never forgotten it. And No Mummers Allowed In, which was a great show, which was also produced by the hall with a big cast of a lot of really great actors in Newfoundland. I love doing that. Oh yes, Time Before Thought, which we did back in 1991, which was written by Agnes Walsh, the great Newfoundland poet, and her friend Mercedes Barry, and they grew up together, and I helped to write it also because I had listened to their stories, both of Agnes and Mercedes, as teenagers, had married American servicemen and gone to live in the States. And it was I was so fascinated. I was thinking, when I was a teenager, like I was afraid to go out the front door, let alone head off down to America to start a new life. And so I was so fascinated by their stories that I eventually pushed them to write this piece. And it was a great p.ece of theater. Love and Anger, this was a great show. I saw Brian Downey played P.D. Maxwell, which I got to play also years before that at Alberta Theatre Projects in Calgary. And that's a great show by George Walker. Ron Hines, of course, did Hank Williams, The Show He Never Gave. That was like a classic event at the LSPU Hall. It was a wonderful show. Between a Rock and a Hard Place, a show about Buren, which Charlie Tomlinson went down and did a collective with people down there. And he also worked with the former Premier of Newfoundland, Kathy Dunderdale. She was part of that committee. I think she may have been the mayor or something at that point. But anyway, that was a great show about, the union and the activities around the fish plant down in Buren. Anyway, That looks like we've run out of posters, I think. Yeah, yeah. Thank you very much for inviting me here today, Kevin, and so I could, wax eloquent about the old days at the Hall. I love talking about the old days, and it was just a great chance. I encourage everyone to just keep coming to the Hall forever and ever and ever. It's the greatest place in the world.